G'day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for joining us for another episode of the MMA edition of the Big Bad Brad Show. My name is Brad Williams, where once again we aim to bring you news and views from the sport of MMA from way up the back in the cheap seats. I've just arrived back in Newcastle from Brizzy. UFC Fight Night Brisbane is now in the books. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, let me just say the response to the first episode has been unreal. Thanks so much to everyone that's liked us, shared the post, shared the episodes, passed it on to people to have a listen to. The feedback's just been unreal. The messages have been coming in, and I really do appreciate everyone that's tried to help get the show off the ground. It really is very much appreciated. You're all good eggs. So I'll move on before we make a baby, but I just wanted to let you know that I really do appreciate it. We've got stacks to talk about this week. Of course, as I mentioned, UFC Fight Night, Mark Hunt versus Frank Mir. So much to come out of that. Some unbelievable stuff. Some stuff not so great, which we will also touch on. But first, we've got a little bit of housekeeping to get to before we do move on to the Brizzy Fight Night card. Some big fight announcements have hit the web since we last caught up on episode 1 of the Big Bad Brad Show. I should remind you too before we go forward, if you do want to check it out, obviously you found it somewhere. You can find us on Twitter at Big Bad Brad MMA or search Big Bad Brad Show MMA on Facebook. One big fight announcement that has come out this week, which was a little bit surprising but was really great news. Donald Cowboy Cerrone is planning on staying at welterweight at 170 pounds. He will be fighting Patrick Cote in Ottawa, Canada in June. I think that's a great move. Cowboy, was never backward in coming forward about how much he struggled with the weight cut. He really didn't enjoy it. And I think it's great news that he's going to be staying at welterweight and really tough out in Patrick Cote. Very experienced campaigner. I think that should be absolute fireworks, and I cannot wait for that fight. Another fight that I found quite surprising but also very, very exciting was the announcement of a quick turnaround for the Spider, Anderson Silva, off his very, very close points decision loss to Michael Bisping in England. He is going to be turning it around at UFC 198 in Brazil, the undercard to the heavyweight title fight between Stipe Miocic and champion Fabricio Verdum. Anderson is going to be taking on Uriah Hall in what could be an absolute barn burner. It's a dangerous fight for Anderson Silva. Uriah Hall is very, very explosive striker, very young, very strong, and this got absolute war written all over it. It all depends on, obviously, which Anderson shows up, because you never really know which Anderson we're going to get. But if we get the Anderson Silva that we know, we've seen in the past, that we saw glimpses of in the Michael Bisping fight, this fight with Uriah Hall could be something very, very special. So very, very exciting. As we move on now to UFC Fight Night Brisbane, Mark Hunt versus Frank Mir in the main event. It was such a sensational event to be a part of. I was up there in Brizzy. For anyone that's never been to a live UFC event, I really can't encourage you enough to get up there and check it out. It's just the most amazing thing you'll ever experience. It's so much fun. The crowd was red hot from the beginning. You got to remember, we were up in Brizzy, so we're on Eastern Standard Time, I should say. So we were at the arena from 8 a.m. to go live back to the States for prime time. And the crowd was just rocking and rolling from the very first fight. Hometown boy Damian Beatdown Brown took a fight with Alan Patrick on just 1 week's notice to kick the card off, and the arena was right well and truly behind him, and he put in a great effort. I did read online that he cut 13 kilos in 7 days to make the lightweight limit for that fight, which is just mind-blowing. I've been trying to lose 30 kilos for 10 years. I couldn't imagine losing 13 kilos in 7 days. And the effect that must have on your body. And for him to put in the performance that he did, he went in there, not only did he survive, he really had his moments. It was a great back-and-forth fight. Didn't get the decision on the day. Alan Patrick picked up the decision victory. One judge scored one of the rounds 10-8 for Alan Patrick. Wake up to yourself, but otherwise it was a very good back-and-forth fight. Damian Brown, certainly nothing to be ashamed of, and there's absolutely zero doubt in my mind that he will get another fight in the UFC, as he should, because it was just a fantastic effort, took the fight on just 1 week's notice and really came in and gave it all he had. Some other great results on the card. On the Fight Pass prelims, Ross Pearson picked up a decision victory over Chad Laprise. Richie Walsh, fair dinkum, you got to feel for him. Lost a very close decision to Viscardi Andrade. This is the second time I think Richie's been dudded by the judges. It wasn't a robbery by any means, of course. It was a very close fight, but I think there was a very strong argument for Richie winning that fight, and I think he's way better than his UFC record suggests, because there's a couple of losses on his record that very well could have been wins, and hopefully when appointing his next fight, the UFC look after him accordingly, because it was a great effort from Rich, very unlucky, and he'll be back stronger than ever. Another standout on that card was New Zealand prospect in the featherweight division, Dan the Hangman Hooker, picked up a first-round submission win over Mark Adiva. It was documented leading up to the fight that he moved his training camp to the Elevation Fight Team in Denver. He got in touch with Neil Magny, who was in the co-main event in Brisbane, and just said, "Hey mate, I'm a huge fan of your style. I'd really love an opportunity to train with you." Neil Magny invited him to come and live with him, and Dan Hooker, I should say, then moved on to train with the guys at Elevation, a gym that's home to the likes of welterweight Brandon Thatch, TJ Dillashaw, former UFC bantamweight champion, Neil Magny, of course, as I mentioned. I think Cowboy Cerrone's also spent some time at the Elevation Fight Team, so he's in very, very good hands, and he showed with that first round submission. It was a beautiful thing to watch, and onward and upward for Dan Hooker. He really is a prospect to keep an eye on, and the Kiwis will be glad to have someone fighting in the UFC that we haven't poached to come and live in Australia / claim as our own. So Dan Hooker, keep an eye on him. He's an absolute prospect. The prelim cards also saw Alan Jouban really bring the noise against local boy Brandon the Badger O'Reilly. The fight went just over 2 minutes. Jouban finished him off with TKO in the first round. The one thing I did love about this fight, though, the boys came out, they were feeling each other out, they got up against the cage, there was a bit of clinch work going on. Jouban landed a big elbow, which kind of got the ball rolling, leading towards the finish. But the one thing I absolutely loved, that as soon as Brendan O'Reilly was in trouble, he planted his feet and just started swinging. He was not going down without a fight, and he gave it everything he had. It was just such an amazing thing to see someone who gets hurt and his first reaction is just to bite down on his mouth guard and just go hammer and tong. It was a really great thing to see, and Brendan O'Reilly will bounce back. He's still only young, and he'll learn from that loss, and I can't wait to see him again. But massive congratulations to Alan Jouban. And then we got onto the main card, which was kicked off with Beck Rawlings and So Hee Ham, the South Korean prospect in the women's strawweight division. Beck picked up a decision. It was a very, very close fight. I think it really could have gone either way. I don't want to say that I was surprised that Beck got the nod, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Harm had got it either. Again, another little bit of a head scratcher from the judges. Two of the three judges scored at 30-27 for Beck. I don't think he can score the first round for her. I really think So Hee Ham won the first round and won it quite definitively. An argument could be made also that she won the third, but again, it was a very, very close fight. Huge win for Beck Rawlings, and it'll be on and upward for the Aussie girl, and we're all very proud of her too, to see her in there doing a thing. The very next fight was it was a tough one to watch for long-time fans of Aussie MMA. In Kiwi fighter James Tahuna. It was his first fight back in almost 2 years. He'd suffered a few losses, and this was his opportunity to come back and show us what he could do. He'd said himself leading up to the fight, he was feeling very strong. He'd really made great use of his time off. He'd had a couple of bad knockouts, and he was really looking to rejuvenate himself and give himself time to recover properly before he got back in there. And this was his opportunity. He came back fresh, and just over 50 seconds into the fight, he was knocked out cold by Canadian Steve Bosse. I would really love to see James Tahuna maybe hang him up after this fight. He's been such a great fighter and representative of New Zealand and Australia for so long. I remember watching him on, in the CFC fights. They used to broadcast them on Fox Sports here in Australia, and I saw him mixing it up with the guys the likes of Anthony the Hippo Parosh, and I saw him win an Australian title with CFC before moving on to the UFC. And it's tough to see someone as good as James Tahuna and who has been so good for so long get knocked out the way he did. Credit to Steve Bosse too. He only landed that one shot. He knew that there was no need for any follow-up, and he walked away, which was very classy and much respect to Steve Bosse. But, if that was the last time we saw James Tahuna in the cage, I think he would have nothing to be ashamed of in leaving the sport at this point. His first 6 fights in the UFC, he went 5-1. The only person that he was defeated by was Alexander Gustafsson. I think he was pretty widely regarded as the best light heavyweight never to be a world champion. Gustafsson's world class. There's no shame in losing to him. After the Gustafsson's fight, he won 4 in a row, and then that's where things sort of hit the skids. He's lost his last 4, but again, the guys he's losing to, I mean, he was submitted by Glover Teixeira, who is a former light heavyweight title challenger. He got knocked out by Shogun Rua the last time the UFC was in Brizzy, who was a former light heavyweight champion. And then he was submitted in Auckland by Nate Marquardt, who is a former middleweight title challenger. So it's not like he's getting towed up by scrubs at the wrist hole. He's losing to the best in the world. And then, of course, this latest knockout to Steve Bosse, which was a pretty tough knockout to watch. And I really do hope that James Tahuna recovers well. And if he wants to come back, that's entirely up to him. But if we don't see him again either, massive congratulations on an unreal career. And you should be absolutely more than proud of yourself for the effort that you put forward. The next fight in the night was a real feel-good moment for all of us Aussie MMA fans. The evergreen Dan Kelly picked up a TKO win over Antonio Carlos Jr., who's a former Ultimate Fighter Brazil winner. He was a $7 underdog going into this fight. He was the biggest underdog on the card, I should say, by a long, long way. And, we all know how the main event finished with Mark Hunt and Frank Mir, but I'm hand on my heart, when I was in that arena, the place was shaking when Dan Kelly was on top of Antonio Carlos Jr. looking for that finish. I would say the reaction was on par with Mark Hunt, if not slightly louder. I really get a feeling that Dan Kelly's got very much the Anthony Perosh kind of feel. He's a guy who, on paper, you think, he's in there and he's mixing it up, and good on him for having a go, but he just finds a way to keep winning. He's a 4-time Olympian in judo, representing Australia. He knows how to win. He knows how to compete. And again, he just keeps defying the odds. And it's impossible to watch his fight on Sunday without a dirty big smile across your face. And as he said after the fight, keep making him the underdog, because he's always going to find a way to keep winning. It was such a great feel-good moment. And again, it reminds me so much of Anthony Perosh. He was in the crowd up in Brizzy. I had the pleasure of seeing the Hippo fight a number of times before he retired. And I was when I was in Melbourne for UFC 193, the Ronda Rousey Holly Holm fight, I actually bumped into Ariel Helwani, who is a fantastic MMA journalist. He's an analyst for Fox Sports in the US and covers the UFC. And I'd never met him before, and I saw him over near the production truck, so I cornered him and just introduced myself, said g'day. And I asked him what fight he was most looking forward to on the card in Melbourne. And he told me that he was most looking forward to Anthony Perosh and Gian Vellante. And I had my mate with me, and he asked him, are you taking the piss, or are you being serious with us? And he said, how can you not appreciate a guy like Anthony Perosh? How can you be a fan of fighting and not love what he's doing at his age and with the amount of time he's been around? And it really sort of struck a chord with me, because, we have these guys coming in, these athletes that look like cartoon characters, and guys that have been training for martial arts their whole lives. And they burst onto the scene and they're in there smashing people to pieces. And then you get guys like Anthony Perosh and like Dan Kelly, who are there because they love to compete and they have the heart to compete, and they just find a way to win. And to be there for Dan Kelly's big moment on Sunday was absolutely amazing. He got the ovation that he deserved. And I think there'll be plenty of people, not only in that arena that day, but in the MMA media and fans around the world, that won't doubt Dan Kelly again, because that man just always finds a way to win. He's a superstar, and can't wait to see him in there again. The next fight on the main card was a fight that someone on the Big Bad Brad show last week predicted could potentially be fight of the night. Not important who. It ended up being the fight of the night, of course. It was Aussie Jake Matthews, the Celtic Kid, taking on Johnny Case. The biggest challenge of Jake Matthews' career so far, a young, hungry challenger in Johnny Case. Their career trajectories are quite different, quite similar, I should say. Not many differences between the boys. And the consensus opinion, I know, in the MMA media was that it'd be a good test for Jake Matthews. He probably wouldn't pick up the win, but he'd learn a lot from the fight. And again, no one filled Jake Matthews in on the script and picked up the submission victory late in the third round, and just looks better and better every time he's in there. I would love to see Jake Matthews fight not so much somebody in the top 15 in his next fight, but someone who's there or thereabouts. You don't want to sort of throw him in the deep end just to see if he'll sink or swim. But at the same time, I'm sure he'd be more than willing to take the next step up in competition and show us what he's made of again. Personally, I would love to see him fight, not so much a gatekeeper, but someone who's been up that pointy end and knows what it's all about. Potentially a Joe Lozon, or even a Ross Pearson, who fought earlier in the night on Brizzy, on the Brizzy fight card. He spends a lot of time in Australia. I know his wife's an Aussie. If that was a main event or a co-main event on an Aussie fight card, I don't think there'd be too many people disappointed. Again, you got to tiptoe the line between throwing him in the deep end and giving him the next step up in challenge. And I think that either Joe Lozon or Ross Pearson would tick that box. And just very excited about what the future holds for Jake Matthews. He is such a prospect. And again, I said it last week and I'll say it again. I really do think he's our best chance of a homegrown, Aussie-born UFC world champion at some stage. He's very, very exciting. Keep an eye on him because you're mad if you don't. The next fight was the co-main event of the evening between welterweight contenders Neil Magny and adopted Aussie Hector Lombard. It brought probably the most negative portion of the card. It was a real shame too because this was a hell of a fight, and sadly the only thing that anyone seemed to be talking about after the fight was the performance of referee Steve Percival. If you aren't aware, there was a situation in the second round where Neil Magny had Hector mounted, then he had back mount, he had him stretched out, and he landed something crazy, like 40 unanswered shots to Hector's head and face. The referee just allowed the fight to keep going, and eventually Hector was saved by the bell. He only lasted 46 seconds in the third round before being TKO'd. This is bad. It really is. There's no other way to put it. Especially for detractors of the sport that are just looking for any reason to send a bit of negative press MMA's way. And Steve Percival is a very experienced referee. He's actually the director of MMA Federation Australia. He's our most senior ref. He referees on most of the Aussie UFC cards and several cards throughout Asia as well. He's refereed in Japan on the China cards. I believe he was an official for the Filipino card as well. It's just bad. I don't really know what his thinking was. I would love to hear Steve Percival's take on things and what he was thinking, and I don't mean that in a sarcastic way or a confrontational way at all. I'm fascinated to hear what his reasoning was for letting the fight go as long as he did. I know that you've got to give the fighter a chance to recover, but anyone with a pair of eyes could see that Hector Lombard was not going to recover from that position, from being in that position and from the punishment that he was absorbing. There were blokes sitting up 50 rows in the back that had been on the beers for 6 hours that could see that fight should have been stopped. It got to the point where, he had Hector mounted and was starting to unleash, and the crowd was going, oh, here we go. Here's the finish. He's going to finish him. The ref's going to stop it. The ref's going to stop it. Why isn't the ref stopping it? Ref, stop it. Stop the fight. It just got uncomfortable to watch. You go from that rush of adrenaline of, oh, here we go, Neil Magny's going to get the finish, to just the whole crowd was booing, almost pleading with him to just stop the fight. And I saw a lot of things online with people saying, oh, they weren't big shots that he was taking. It's not the point. The whole argument has come about from the term of intelligently defending yourself. Hector was not doing that. He was basically covering his face. He wasn't trying to improve his position. He wasn't trying to counter. He wasn't really defending. He was done. He was he was completely compromised. Neil Magny was in such a dominant position, and the fight should have been stopped. A couple of things that haven't really been talked about after that fight is the fact that the fight could very easily have been stopped in the first round too, the other way. Hector had Neil Magny in serious trouble. He dropped him twice. He was on top, landing heavy shots, some of them very clearly to the back of the head, which again is another little bit of a criticism on Steve Percival. I think 3 or 4 times he warned Hector about shots to the back of the head. At what point do you stop it and take a point? It was very, very close to being stopped in the first round. And another thing that people have failed to sort of mention is that Hector Lombard's corner have also got a responsibility to their fighter as well. And when he was in that position and it was clear that the referee wasn't going to stop it, they do have the option of throwing in the towel. So it seems like the two people who were there to protect Hector, both his corner and the referee, both let him down on Sunday. Hector will be back, I'm sure, stronger than ever. I can't wait to see it because a Hector Lombard who is firing on all cylinders is a handful for anyone in the division, and still someone who could very realistically be the UFC welterweight champion at some point. Best of luck with his recovery, and a huge congratulations to Neil Magny, because this really, really was a huge win. And if his next fight is not a fight with someone up the pointy end, potentially a number one contenders fight, I'd be very, very surprised, because Neil Magny weathered the storm and came out the other end with flying colours and showed what a class athlete he is, and also what a class individual, because he was basically begging with Steve Percival in the second round to stop that fight, and you could tell that he was really uncomfortable with the amount of punishment he was delivering to Hector Lombard. And again, congratulations to Neil Magny, and best of luck with everything in the future. And now that brings us to the main event of the evening, Mark the Super Samoan Hunt and Frank Mir. It's to be in the crowd live for a Mark Hunt fight is really something that every fight fan should experience at some point in their lives. That man is just a freak of nature, and to be there for yet another one of his now, standard one-punch walk-away knockouts was just incredible. Came into the fight, he looked great, he looked fit, he looked motivated, and just stalked down Frank Mir for the very short time that the fight went. One other occasion, he loaded up that big right hand and missed by just centimetres. And, the next time around, Frank wasn't so lucky and Mark Hunt was able to put him away. And again, it just shows the class of Mark Hunt too. He landed that big right, it hit him right under the ear. Frank Mir went down, and it was very clear that his night was over, and Mark Hunt didn't see the need to deliver any more shots. And another highlight reel addition for Mark Hunt. The big question now is what's next for the Super Samoan. I read one article on MMA Junkie, which is a fantastic website. You should check it out if you haven't already. That suggested that maybe Mark Hunt's next fight would be with Josh Barnett. I would really like to see Mark Hunt fight someone maybe a little bit higher up the ladder. I think that a heavyweight title fight in Australia would be huge money for the UFC. And again, if there's anything we've learned in recent history with the UFC is that if it makes dollars, it doesn't have to make sense. Not that a heavyweight title fight for Mark Hunt doesn't make sense, but there are people that are suggesting that Mark Hunt is more in that gatekeeper kind of a category and that his days of challenging for a heavyweight title are probably behind him. I think nothing could be further from the truth. To come out there and put away a two-time heavyweight champion like Frank Mir in 3 minutes, to think that man is not ready for a heavyweight title fight is absurd. Mark Hunt is a rock star, and I think that he is more than deserving of a shot at the heavyweight title. If he is not awarded a fight with the winner of Stipe Miocic and Fabricio Verdum, I would think he will most likely fight the winner of Andrei Arlovski and Alistair Overeem, who are fighting on the card in the Netherlands in just a couple of months' time. And a win there would almost certainly position Mark Hunt for another crack at that UFC heavyweight title. That would be huge business in Australia, a Mark Hunt heavyweight championship fight. I don't know that they would sell out Etihad Stadium. That was a lot. I think even the Holly Holm Ronda Rousey fight was ambitious. 80,000 tickets was always going to be a big ask. But I mean, you put it in a 30 or 40,000 seat stadium and they would be hanging off the rafters. That would just be something very, very special for Aussie combat sport fans and for Mark Hunt himself. And I would be there front and centre. I think that would be absolutely amazing. Moving on from UFC Fight Night Brizzy, other big news that broke this week, and it sort of, falls into the category of being, it'd be funny if it wasn't so sad. And that was the failed drug tests of both Ken Shamrock and Kimbo Slice from their Bellator fight a few months back. It turned out to not be much of a fight at all. There were calls from people as respected as Joe Rogan that perhaps the fight was fixed. And then after the sideshow was well and truly over, it comes out that both men tested positive for a banned substance. It's a tricky sort of a situation that Bellator find themselves in because I know you've got to try and find a way to stand out from the pack. They did that. The Kimbo Ken Shamrock fight drew huge numbers. I know that the next Kimbo Slice fight against Data 5000 drew even bigger numbers. But it was also a fight where Data 5000 almost passed away after the fight. He went into cardiac arrest and had to be resuscitated. So it begs the question of, are eyeballs on the fight enough? And I don't know. I don't know the answer. It's just something that Bellator is going to need to have a look at. But again, if things like this continue to happen, then it really does make you wonder if it's worth it. But all the best to Ken and Kimbo with whatever they decide to do next, because I think it'll be a little while before we see either of them inside a mixed martial arts cage again. So again, massive congratulations to all the winners from UFC Fight Night Brisbane. Big things ahead for some of the people involved with that card. I can't wait till the UFC comes back to Australia again. I don't know when that will be, but we'll keep you posted as soon as they do announce it, because as I said earlier in the podcast, if you haven't had a chance to experience the UFC live, and you are a fight fan, or even if you're just curious, get there and check it out. What about this? I went out to get a drink in between fights at the Brizzy card, and there was this old shagger working the door. He was an usher at the Brisbane Entertainment Centre. And I came walking in with my drink, and I heard him say to one of the other ushers, "Oh, mate, I've had just about a gutful of this. This fighting's like watching bloody paint dry." What are you talking about, Nev? If watching paint dry was like that, Torben sales would be through the roof. There is nothing more exciting than the UFC live. You are kidding yourself, and you were getting paid to do it. Shame on you, you old shagger. But yeah, as I say, get there and check it out next time they come to town. You will not be disappointed. And that brings us to the end of another edition of the Big Bad Brad Show. Thank you so much for checking it out. You can find us on Twitter at Big Bad Brad MMA, or on Facebook, just search Big Bad Brad Show MMA. Thanks so much for checking it out. It is very much appreciated, and I'll catch you next time.